This is Margaret
Great.
Wally, for those of you who know my name. I'm super excited to see the number of folks joining this call who I recognize from the CELC and from the community dashboard and from the 100-day challenges. So really excited to see you all on here. Hey, Erica.
And Margaret, is there anybody else? I'll do a bit of an intro here. Is there anybody else that we'd like to test audio for before we get started?
I think we are good for now. I haven't seen Aja join yet, but hopefully they will soon.
Great, great. Well, welcome everybody. This is Megan with Away Home America. I am delighted to see all of you here. This is where you are, the Introducing the Grand Challenge webinar. So you're in the right spot. And on the slide in front of you, as well as a text in the chat box, there is a prompt for your social accounts. We would love to have you let folks know about the work of the Grand Challenge and your community's commitment. You can cut and paste directly from the text in the chat box. And welcome, we're glad to have you here. I know folks are still joining. A couple of logistics. All of attendees are attending in listen-only mode. So if you are joining with your computer audio during the question and answer portion, which will be the latter half of the webinar, you'll be able to raise your hand. You can see the little hand icon at the bottom of your screen, and we can unmute you. If you're joining from your computer audio, if you're joining by phone, that's fine. We'll just have you chat your question in the chat box and respond to all questions there. So welcome. Please do find the chat box. That is the first orientation activity on the webinar today. And if you could please, in the chat box, place your name, your community, and your role or your agency, that would be great. We'd love to know that you're here. On Monday, when we had the same webinar content during Monday, it was wonderful to see everybody's introductions, and I'm seeing those start to come in. So please find the chat box and let us know that you're here. Welcome, everybody. We are recording the webinar today. And Margaret, why don't we actually start that recording now?
Done.
Great. Welcome, everybody. The recording for this webinar is started, and I am seeing the introductions come into the chat box. Welcome, everyone. It's great to see all of these names. That makes me so happy. Would love to see all of your faces, too. So welcome, everyone. You are at the Introducing the Grand Challenge webinar. We're glad to have you here today. I'm going to give the logistics just one more time, and then we will dive into what we have to share with you today. All attendees during the webinar today are in listen-only mode. If you are joining via your computer audio during the question and answer portion, you'll be able to raise your hand. You can find that hand icon, I believe it's at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be able to unmute you. If you're calling from your phone, that's fine. We'll just have you chat your questions in the chat box, and we'll be responding. Jonathan Likes will be moderating the panel a little bit later this afternoon. Please do find that chat box, continue to introduce yourself. Welcome, everyone. Oh, Eric, I haven't seen you in forever in sunny Minnesota. And throughout the next hour and a half, please feel free to place any comments or questions in that chat box, and then we'll have a dedicated portion for Q&A towards the end of the session. We will be capturing those questions. So if you have a question and it's not responded to right away, never fear, we'll be getting to that during the Q&A portion, and Margaret will be capturing all of those. So welcome to all of you. Coaching and faculty team, you have all been moved into panelists, so you can help me respond to questions as well, and glad to have you all with us here today as well. Let's get started. So we have a couple of objectives for our time together today. And one of those objectives is to really give you a basic what, so what, and now what of the Grand Challenge. What is our aim together in this initiative? What does it mean for you and your community? And what are the next steps to move towards expressing your community's interest in this opportunity and becoming a Grand Challenge community in the fall of this year? We're going to give you the basics. And before we get started, I also want to flag that we're going to have an application webinar in several months at the beginning of August. And that application webinar is going to go into much greater detail for the operational folks on the call. So if you are an ops person, we are glad you were here. You may leave with more questions not answered, but we're going to get to some of those in the application webinar. We also have an invitation for you on this webinar today. The Grand Challenge is an opportunity that centers LGBTQ youth and youth of color, and we believe that centering these young people most likely to experience homelessness is the way we will end homelessness for everyone. We believe that the achievements of our movement lead us in this direction, really that all signs point to the Grand Challenge, and we want you to join us. That leads to our third objective, which is we are going to offer you some next steps and tools to gain your community's support. What are the next steps over the coming few weeks? what will happen leading up to the launch of the Grand Challenge, and what should you be looking out for in your community. So we're glad you're here. Hope that you're excited with us. It's hard to convey enthusiasm in a webinar format, but we're going to do our best, and we're just really glad to kick this work off with all of you. So who and what is Away Home America? Away Home America is a national initiative to build a movement to prevent and end homelessness among young people. We are made up of service providers, young people who've experienced homelessness, national advocates, researchers, philanthropists, all coming together behind this common goal. We've existed for about 3 years, and we are grateful for some of the most profound national leaders on the topic of youth homelessness. You'll see many of them on the slide in front of you that make up our current steering committee. And you can go to our website for more information about our current steering committee and who those great folks are. Over the past few years, we have been involved in launching 100-Day Challenge to end youth homelessness across the country. We've designed a policy framework with the national leading advocates on the issue of youth homelessness so we can speak in a collective voice. And we've convened all of you many times throughout the year to learn from one another and to build momentum towards ending youth homelessness. Our staff team supports the movement, and you will see all of us here on the slide in front of you. Jared, Monzona, and Margaret are joining us here today, and I'm grateful for all of their hard work. Welcome all of y'all. And at this point, I want to pass things to Jasmine to give a welcome from USICH to talk about how these efforts to build a coordinated community response are aligned and how they are part of our common national strategy. Jasmine.
Great. Thanks, Megan. Hi, everyone. Really happy to be here today on behalf of the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. So as Megan said, I was asked to share the federal perspective on the Grand Challenge. So big picture, we see the Grand Challenge as a very exciting opportunity to connect community efforts with the federal vision for ending youth homelessness. So ensuring the experience of homelessness is rare, brief, and one time. And alignment with the federal criteria and benchmarks, you'll hear more about what this means in a minute, but alignment to track progress is important from our perspective because it reiterates the complementary nature of the efforts underway, including 100-Day Challenges, the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program, and now the Grand Challenge. So I think the message from a federal perspective is for communities, and that really is you folks on the phone, to know that we're walking this walk with you. So as you're testing and learning through things that work well and the things that don't, we're learning with you. This is a hard, messy work in communities, and you have support from a network of partners to do it. And that's evidenced not only by who you're going to hear from today, but if you look in that chat box where folks are continuing to sign in, you'll see you're really part of an incredibly dynamic and strong movement. So at USICH, we're clear in our understanding that if we're going to succeed in efforts to design and implement policies, programs, and systems that are client-centered and responsive to what people want and need, then we must ensure that those systems are not leaving any person behind. And that's really what the Grand Challenge offers. It's an opportunity for communities to boldly respond to what we know the research shows us about disparities among LGBTQ youth and youth of color. So put another way, if we want to see different outcomes, then we cannot keep doing more of the same thing. Ensuring efforts to prevent and end homelessness do not leave LGBTQ youth and youth of color behind or push them aside means we're responding in a way that works for all young people. And that's how we see the vision of the Grand Challenge. So as federal partners, we see this opportunity as groundbreaking, and we're looking forward to lifting up the work as examples of what's possible. On a side note, it's been incredibly effective in our efforts to end veteran homelessness to keep building what we refer to as proof points on progress and what's possible. And we now have over 70 communities across more than 30 states that have proven ending veteran homelessness is possible and sustainable. And that's what the Grand Challenge is contributing to, helping to establish proof points of what's possible and accelerating progress on a national level. And that's really incredible stuff. So I'm going to get out of your way. I'm going to hand things back to Megan so we can dig into what the Grand Challenge is and what we can expect moving forward.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. I am still seeing folks join, and I'm just delighted by all of the names I'm seeing in the chat box. Please, if you are just joining us, enter your introduction in the chat box. We'd love to know that you're here. A quick note, please ensure that you are sending messages to all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see that you're here. There's an option to do that in the chat box. Just really glad to welcome all of you, and thank you, Jasmine. Let's turn now to what the Grand Challenge is. What is the Grand Challenge? The Grand Challenge, let's start with our goal. The Away Home America Grand Challenge will help 10 communities end homelessness for LGBTQ youth and youth of color, setting the path to ending homelessness for all young people. As Jasmine said, we see targeting on those that are most likely to experience homelessness as one of the key parts of our strategy to end homelessness for everyone. So the Grand Challenge is part of our steps, part of our path along that road. It's not the destination in and of itself, but it's a key part of our strategy to how we will get to an effective end to homelessness for everyone. So this is our goal. This is the work that we'll do together. And throughout the presentation today, you'll be seeing the question to you, which is your community grand? We know that everyone's community is terrific. What we mean tongue-in-cheek there is your community prepared to take this next step to show that it's possible to reach an effective proof point on the issue of youth homelessness, to show that actually a dramatic change is possible and necessary in communities? Is that your community? We think so. And we're going to talk more about what we're looking for here in just a moment. The Grand Challenge, put another way, is a problem-solving initiative organized around several critical approaches: LGBTQ and racial equity, youth collaboration, and quality improvement. And we need to think of a snazzier term for quality improvement. If you have any ideas, please drop them in the chat box. But these are the core approaches, essentially, for the Grand Challenge. It's a complementary addition to our national strategy, where the criteria and benchmarks really are the map to our eventual destination, and they provide mileposts along the road, if we're working with a road analogy here. The various initiatives supporting communities to reach an effective end to youth homelessness are vehicles down that road. So it could be a 100-day challenge, it could be the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Projects. There's ways to reach those signposts in that eventual destination. The Grand Challenge is a new vehicle on this shared road for some communities who are willing to take this particular step towards really centering LGBTQ youth and youth of color and showing that it's possible to effectively end homelessness. So actually I want to turn now to not Mark Jones, but there is Mark Jones on the slide in front of you. Instead, Beth Horowitz at Chapin Hall, who's going to talk about the Grand Challenge, which has a targeted focus which arises entirely in response to the data. And Beth, before I pass things off to you, we turn to, in our planning for the Grand Challenge, two sources extensively. One is the SPARK Phase 1 study finding, and another is the Chapin Hall Voices of Youth Count, both which show that overwhelmingly those young people who are most likely to experience homelessness are youth of color and LGBTQ young people. So Beth here for a couple of moments to give a bit more context to those findings.
Thanks, Megan, and hi, everyone. So Voices of Youth Count, for those who haven't heard of it, is a national policy research initiative that Chapin Hall launched to try to build the evidence base and answer some of the very basic questions about what youth homelessness looks like, who young people are that experience homelessness, and how they're managing to get by as we continue to build this coordinated national response. And in that research, as you see on the screen, we found that LGBTQ youth are 120% more likely, or 2.2 times as likely, to experience homelessness as other young people. We also found, in addition to the Sparks data point, that youth who identify as Black or African American are 1.8 times as likely to experience homelessness. Youth who are Hispanic and not white are 1.3 times as likely, and youth who are Native American or Alaska Native are 2.2 times as likely to experience homelessness. So we see that for each of these different groups of youth, much higher rates of experiencing homelessness that is out of kilter with sort of their demographic representation. And another, we think, really important data point as we think about centering young people of color and young people who identify as LGBTQ in our response is the fact that if you are from both of those groups, it gets even more stark. So we found that young people who are Black and LGBTQ reported the highest rates of homelessness. They reported homelessness 16% of the time, compared to just 4% of the time for white youth who are not LGBTQ. So that when you're both a young person who identifies as Black and LGBTQ, it becomes 4 times more likely that you're reporting homelessness. And so with that, sort of just really emphasizing how important it is that we center these young people in our response, and believe wholeheartedly, as Megan shared at the beginning, that by doing so, by moving us more quickly forward to ending their homelessness, will make progress for all young people.
Thank you so much, Beth. Again, this targeted focus in the Grand Challenge arises 100% in response to the data. The Grand Challenge is radical in terms that it starts at the root. And when we look at the data, what we understand about the experience of homelessness in communities, we understand that we need to actually start with young people who are most likely to experience it. This is targeted universalism, and we're going to talk more about that here shortly. I want to move to some greater details about the Grand Challenge. So what to expect. Before I do that, before I walk through the pieces of what the Grand Challenge is, though, I want to tell you what some of those pieces mean. And I want to talk about where you as a community might be now. Again, I believe that all communities that are working towards an effective end to youth homelessness are pretty remarkable, because you're imagining something that doesn't exist just yet. And your community might have a commitment to equity, but you don't know how to operationalize it. And it might feel as though LGBT and racial equity are things that you say, things that you go to trainings about, but you don't know how to actually make it real. And you don't know how that commitment to equity actually translates to a different experience for young people who are most likely to be experiencing homelessness, and ultimately all young people. Your community may also have a commitment to youth collaboration, and you might be struggling to make that commitment real. So there may be moments where there's really strong connection with your youth action board. That relationship might seem inspired and collegial and strong, and other moments where you feel like you're not quite sure if it's working at all. Your community may have system data, but you might have questions about the quality of your system data. So yes, you're looking at the young people coming into your system, young people exiting your system, how long people might be experiencing homelessness, but you're just not confident that that data is as good as it can be. And I know that if you are a community here on this webinar, you are doing good and important things to address youth homelessness, but you're not seeing those things add up to an actual difference, an actual driving down the number of young people experiencing homelessness from week to week or month to month. And if this is you, if some of those remarks resonate with you, you're the community that we're looking for. The big question that I have for you, and the invitation that I mentioned on behalf of Away Home America and movement leaders, is, are you grand enough to imagine with us where we're going? So what you will hear from the presenters, from the coaches and faculty, and from myself is that we are incredibly clear with the Grand Challenge on where we're going. We're incredibly clear on the goal and what we think that goal will do. We don't know the steps to get there. So to be a Grand Challenge community is to take a certain amount of risk. You're signing up with us to a destination that is known and a path that is not certain, and you are building that path with us. And we're not entirely sure what that's going to take because we haven't done it yet. So that's the challenge. That's the invitation to Grand Challenge communities. And are you grand enough to imagine that future and then work towards that future with us? When we do that, we will have communities who have partnered with young people, centered those young people most likely to experience homelessness, done really strong work with their data to understand how they're making progress, and they will have created a future in communities, a present in communities that is radically different than what we have today. So let's talk about the components of the Grand Challenge, sort of down a level. Communities will start with being in the room with the best of the best national coaches and thinkers on youth homelessness, and they're going to receive support and training on the critical approaches of the Grand Challenge: LGBT and racial equity, youth collaboration, quality improvement, and just really support to take a look at their data and their reporting capacity. The first thing that communities will start to do is develop a quality by name list and test strategies to reduce the number of young people experiencing homelessness. A quick note about the by name list: we know that folks on the phone, communities, particular communities of color and LGBT young people may have questions about, what do you mean you're going to put my name on a list? And how could I have confidence that this system is going to help me if it has not helped me well so far? That's a key question that the Grand Challenge communities and coaches need to grapple with. How do we have a look at who's experiencing homelessness in the community in a way that can be trustworthy for those young people that we know experience homelessness most often? Together, communities will begin testing and implementing effective strategies to reduce homelessness for LGBTQ youth and youth of color. And frankly, we are going to try many more things that don't work than things that do. But that iteration is going to be rapid and methodical. In Grand Challenge communities, we will reach a place where we have ended homelessness for LGBTQ youth and youth of color. And across the country, that will be a strong stepping stone towards actually ending youth homelessness for everyone. That's the snapshot of the components of the Grand Challenge. Communities give, as part of being a Grand Challenge community, is first and foremost a ride or die team of 5 movement leaders and champions willing to take risks. When we presented this content on Monday, lots of folks had questions about, well, who do you mean by that team of 5 movement leaders? Who needs to be on that team? And in our Q&A document and some of the follow-up from this webinar, we'll provide a little more structure around really ensuring that that ride or die team of movement leaders includes folks from the systems who we know need to be at the table. What we want to emphasize here is that these are folks willing to really lead the charge in your community and build the support, build the movement in your community to reach the aim. Communities will also give monthly system data. They will give time, effort, and political will to test change ideas, again, understanding that much of what we test may not hit the mark as we move towards those things that really will. And a lot of gut and chutzpah. Communities will receive, and honestly, these bullet points here on the slide are not ordered quite right. I think the thing I want to emphasize first is that communities will receive the best of the best national coaching on youth homelessness, quality improvement, youth collaboration, racial and LGBT equity. You will have a team around you that is working to solve these problems with you. You will also receive travel funding for Grand Challenge strategy gatherings 3 times a year to cover the cost of your community's team coming together with the other Grand Challenge communities and coaches and faculty. You will initially receive, initially and throughout the challenge, but we'll start with support to reach quality data, including a by name or an active list, and visualization tools that will help your community see where you're at currently and where we're trying to go. You'll have a lead coach that organizes your experience in the Grand Challenge, so you don't have a ton of folks calling you up every other day, and a cohort of communities and national leaders that are alongside you until the goal is reached. And frankly, communities will receive bragging rights as some of the first communities to effectively end homelessness and show that it's possible in communities across the country. There's no explicit financial commitment for communities to participate in the Grand Challenge. There's not a cost for what communities receive out front. Communities also do not receive any direct program funding as a result of participating in the Grand Challenge. That said, part of the role of coaches and faculty in the Grand Challenge is to support communities in connecting with their local philanthropic funders, and we believe that participation in the Grand Challenge raises your community's profile in a way that makes you more competitive for state, local, and federal dollars. We also think just participation in the challenge is a motivating factor for additional opportunities that may come up as a result of your community's risk-taking and challenge here. Here's another look at the Grand Challenge team. This is the initial lineup, if you will, the starting lineup of Grand Challenge coaches and faculty that will be with you alongside each step of the way. Many of these folks are folks that you know and who might already be working in your community. We gave a good deal of thought at Away Home America to how we would build the coaching and the faculty team, and we decided that we wanted to actually leverage folks who are already experts, already known and working with you in many of your communities, so that if you are a YHTP round 1 or round 2 community, for instance, you could continue to work with some folks who are supporting you, and that experience could be a more coordinated one. And here's another view of the team. What I want to stress here is that each Grand Challenge community will have a connection to a lead coach. That is Derek Wintorf at CSH, who's looking a little lonely up there on that slide, but we know Kendon Elliott from Youth Collaboratory has just recently this week been assigned, and another coach will be hired through CSH. That will be your lead contact as a Grand Challenge community. And then to the left side of the screen, what you see there is really a toolkit of experts and supports on the Grand Challenge approaches. And those are all folks that you can draw in for support and coaching. They will also all be present at the 3 times a year in-person sessions. You'll see the Away Home America staff team there too, in particular data support from Margaret Wally. And a note about our dedicated funding partners. There's a tremendous amount of support and belief in the possibility of ending youth homelessness shared by our philanthropic funders and partners. And these are just a few. Also special shout out to Funders Together to End Homelessness, who is a really key partner with us at Away Home America and in the work. Let's move now to how Away Home America will measure progress towards its goal of effectively ending youth homelessness. And there's a bit of content on the webinar today about the measurement framework. There's also a healthy tension here that how we measure the work is something that I want to share with you, and how we get there is really the heart of the work. So what will we test in communities? What will we try? There's a bit more of that coming in the application webinar as well, but this is a question that comes up, so let's talk about how we measure the end state. Here's the fine print. When Grand Challenge communities have reached the goal of the Grand Challenge, they have effectively ended sheltered and unsheltered homelessness for LGBTQ youth and youth of color, ages 13 to 24 in their community. Specifically, they have reached benchmark A, USICH, benchmark A, indicators 5 and 6, and benchmark B. So we are aligning our measurement framework directly with the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness criteria and benchmarks, so that communities, if they're seeing progress here, can have confidence that they are seeing progress towards an eventual certification in ending homelessness for anyone, as measured by the benchmarks. Again, this is one step along the road. Moving now to core approaches, and I am going to pass things very soon here to both Jonathan, Caleb, and Jake, who are going to share a bit more about the core approaches. of the Grand Challenge. And before I do that, I mentioned targeted universalism earlier on. The Grand Challenge is really grounded in the theory of targeted universalism. Many of you are familiar with an analogy that's most commonly used, which is the curb cut. When a community puts in a curb cut for people who might have disabilities around their mobility, those curb cuts actually make the city more navigable for everybody. People with strollers, folks who might be using canes. So the curb cut is something designed for a portion, designed for a minority in the community, but that actually makes the community more navigable for everyone. The Grand Challenge is grounded in this theory that if we meet the needs of those most impacted by homelessness, we actually create the systems that work better for everyone and that get us there quicker. Here's another look at those approaches. Again, quality improvement, youth collaboration, and LGBTQ and racial equity. Those approaches together equal the Grand Challenge. And we believe that this is the swiftest way to drive dramatic progress. I'd like to pass things now to Caleb. And Caleb, I don't know that we've tested your sound. Are you here with us?
I am here. Can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead, Caleb. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Hey, everyone. My name is Caleb. I use he, she, and they pronouns. I work with True Colors United in Washington, D.C. And we'll be leading the youth collaboration portion of the work. And that is going to include youth collaboration, but also some inclusion work. I wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of what this philosophy is. So the first question you may ask is, what does authentic partnership look like for youth? The ways in which youth are invited to participate are very important. It's up to the adults working with them to be intentional, communicative, and aware as these partnerships are formed. Historically, youth experiencing homelessness may have been taken advantage of and tokenized in multiple ways, even by organizations and practices intending to support them. Youth are often asked to share their stories on panels or in the media or fundraising events. And although this is usually well-intentioned, these type of opportunities are sometimes limiting. They usually don't include the young person's ideas for impacting change, and the young person may be re-traumatized in the process of explaining these experiences, particularly when the value of their lived experience is profited from without an exchange of information or services. Authentic youth collaboration is about more than inviting a young person to share their stories of the past. It's also about providing them with the space to share their vision for the future. Some of the concepts to be mindful of whenever doing any type of youth collaboration is being intentional about the decision-making power that youth have in your work. Make sure that you uplift the impact of their work and really make sure that they understand their impact as well. And that youth are the experts of their own truth. And when asking young people to be involved in your work, hear them out. Build a reciprocal relationship where you honor their experiences while allowing their experiences and ideas to inform the process. So just as a tool, next slide, just as a tool for you all to be able to take back, there is more information that you can access through the Youth Collaboration Toolkit. This is something that you can go and type into your Google search engine and pull it up, and it's a downloadable PDF. Or you can also go through our True Colors United website, truecolorsunited.org, to be able to access this, as well as many other learning modules, opportunities, toolkits that we have on there. But one of the things I want to make sure that you do is actually just read through this. It will be a great baseline for you to be able to do the youth collaboration work that is to come.
Thank you so much, Caleb. Jonathan.
Groundwork on Equity 101, one key aspect to us achieving our aim in the Grand Challenge is to achieve LGBTQ and racial equity in this work. I think this image is a great image that really details what equity really is in the work that we do. I'm sure many folks have seen this image before, and there are many versions of it. So if you look at the first image, you'll see an imagery depiction of equality, and equality, this idea of sameness across the board. And for many years, equality was like the key word. Everyone was using it a lot. We were fighting for equality. And then we realized this idea of sameness doesn't really get us anywhere when we're thinking about the people who have been harmed and damaged from institutional and systemic racism throughout history. So then we move to this concept of equity, which is this radical redistribution of resources based on who has been harmed. It's a response to institutional and systemic racism making sure you lift up the needs of those communities. And equity is central to the grand challenge. It's an important term to get us where we need to go, but it's just a means to the end. It's not the end. And as Megan was describing, we want to think radically. We want to think at the roots about how are we really getting to our aim to actually not put Band-Aids on a problem, but to actually fix the problems that we're facing in our society. So that gets us to this idea of liberation. What does it mean to live in a world where young people no longer have to experience the systemic barriers and navigate those systemic barriers in our life? To do that, we have to fight for justice. Justice is this process of removing the systemic barriers that exist in the lives of young people. I think, so equity is when people's race, gender, economic status, sexual orientation no longer determines their economic, social, and political opportunities. Distinct from equality, it looks at leveling the playing field, ensuring that the starting line does not determine where one finishes. But to achieve justice, what do we need to do? We have to actually participate in racial justice organizing. So this means being prepared and competent in confronting and addressing the inequities encountered by LGBTQ youth and youth of color impacted by homelessness. This also means strengthening our knowledge, skills, attitudes, and individual and personal competencies to address inequities based on race, gender, sexuality, both internally within our work, but also in the world externally. So this is an effort for us to explicitly promote racial equity and LGBTQ equity in our organization's governance and practices, and acknowledging the impact of structural and institutional racism to confront explicit practices that treat people different based on race, gender, and sexuality. Thanks, Megan. Pass it back.
Thanks, Jonathan. And for a last look at the core approaches that make up the Grand Challenge, I'm going to pass things off to Jake McGuire to talk about quality improvement that, again, needs a better, cooler name than quality improvement, but that's what we have today. It's a process that is going to ground the testing of change ideas in communities. Jake?
Awesome. Yeah, and often it's just called improvement science. So if you want to get better outcomes, what is a reliable science for doing that? So you can think of it that way. My name is Jake McGuire. I'm from Community Solutions. I work on the Built for Zero team here. Some of you may know us. So as Megan said, this initiative is about trying to do something that's never been done before. And that means we don't have the answers. We don't know exactly how we're going to get there. There are no 100% experts. There's no playbook. The answers to solving this problem are really going to come from you and the young people in your communities. And as Jasmine said, that means you're going to have to try new stuff. You're going to have to test new ideas, and you're going to need a rigorous way to learn as you go. And that is, we hope, what quality improvement is. Quality improvement is really just a methodology for testing and refining new ideas. And it makes it very easy. I think one of the strengths of the methodology is it makes it really easy for teams to participate in that innovation process together. Your by name list, if you move to the next slide, is really going to be the foundation for your work to do quality improvement. That's why this by name list is so important, because it's going to give you a secure, reliable, and most importantly, a comprehensive data set on what homelessness among young people in your community looks like month over month as you move forward. And the goal of your improvement work is going to be to start to see that by name list number, that overall number, go down each month. So the question you're constantly going to be asking is, do we have fewer young people experiencing homelessness this month than we did last month? And if not, what do we maybe need to try to do differently? So are you willing to sort of measure that number in real time, hold yourself accountable to it, and then pivot in response to the things that that information is telling you? I want to share with you, just from our work on Built for Zero, this methodology has been really helpful. There are now 12 communities across the country that have used this science-based approach to get to zero for chronic homelessness or veteran homelessness. And we're really, really excited to help try to integrate that with the transformative equity approach that the Grand Challenge is rooted in. The last thing I'll say is you may be familiar already with some of this. You may have a by name list. You may hope that it's comprehensive. You may be wondering, okay, what do I do with all this data? Now I have this list of names. How do I actually use that for improvement? And so I just want to assure you that getting really trained up in quality improvement is going to help you answer questions like, how do I know what I should try next? How do I know when to stop trying something? You know, when to adapt something versus when to just totally abandon it. And also, and I think this is really, really important, how do I know when a data point represents real change in my system? Things have really changed, things are reliably better versus just normal variation in my system. And I think that's a really, really important question as we think about building not just solutions, but sustainable solutions for our communities. So I will stop there and turn it back over to you, Megan. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Jake, Caleb, and Jonathan. Again, when we think about the Grand Challenge is a focus on LGBT young people and youth of color using a racial and LGBT equity approach, partnering directly with young people in meaningful and leadership ways, and then applying this tool of improvement science to test if the things that we're trying are actually getting us closer to our aim statement. And that really, those are the components of the Grand Challenge, how we're grounded. I want to go through an overview before we move to question and answer here very soon. I want to move to an overview of the community criteria and the application process. If you have questions, you can enter those questions in the chat box now, and Margaret is going to be queuing up questions with Jonathan here shortly. So if you've got questions already, we'd love to hear them, and we'll start getting them in the queue. Let's talk about some brass tacks. I mentioned this at the start of the webinar. We will have 2 application webinars in August that will go through the application in great detail. This is just to give you a bit of a sense of what your community might be considering here in the coming weeks to express interest. Here is a timeline. The Grand Challenge application is going to be released alongside the National Alliance to End Homelessness Conference on July 23rd. And on July 23rd in the evening, if you happen to be in DC, you don't necessarily need to be going to the conference, there will be a reception at the National Alliance to End Homelessness with the coaches and faculty of the Grand Challenge to celebrate that the application has been posted and to hear more about the road ahead. There will be 2 webinars on August 1st and 2nd. There are specific details about the times for those webinars and the materials on our website. And applications will be due just a few short weeks later on August 21st. Flagging that that is a short timeline for communities, particularly for folks that have the end of the fiscal year, other factors through the summer. So that's why we're having these webinars now, so that communities can start to begin socializing this opportunity with their stakeholders, young people, system leaders, and community members. I do want to say that the application is going to be a fairly straightforward one. We don't want to spending a lot of time doing a written application, but we do want you to think about your community's commitment and ensure that you have the commitment of several important bodies before we move forward here. So communities will be selected by the National Youth Forum on Homelessness by the end of the month, and we will be announcing awarded communities at the True Colors United Impact Summit the first week in September. We expect that Grand Challenge communities will gather for the first time in person in mid-October. So some fairly rapid process over the next couple of months to get the Grand Challenge off the ground. Here are the threshold criteria. So the following criteria are required for communities that will be selected to participate in the Grand Challenge. You might be asking yourself now, is my community prepared? Is my community eligible to be a part of the Grand Challenge? The first criteria is that you demonstrate awareness around how your system functions today for LGBT youth and youth of color. You don't need to have the answers, and we suspect that communities don't yet have the answers, but you need to have started to ask the question and be looking at your system data to understand what might the experiences of LGBTQ youth and youth of color be in your community today. You need to have a commitment to transformational equity work and an understanding that this work is fundamentally difficult and different. So there is a commitment. You don't need to have the answer there either, but you need to be committed with your community leaders to walking on this road with us. You do need to have the articulated commitment of community leadership, including a youth champion, a youth action board, your youth action board, the lead from your continuum of care, and your HMIS data lead. A youth champion can be a lead philanthropic partner in the community. It can be a leading RHY provider. There's some flexibility around who that youth champion is, but you do need the commitment of the youth action board, your continuum of care lead, and HMIS data lead as well. You need to have a commitment to collect and share monthly system data transparently. If you go to the Away Home America website, you'll see some examples of how we share data transparently through our Away Home America community dashboard, and I see that there's several community dashboard communities already here, so glad that you're on the line. And finally, a commitment to send your core team, your 5 ride or die community leaders, to strategy gatherings in person 3 times per year. There is in the materials on our website some additional questions that will be asked in the application. They are additional criteria, they're not required, but they're criteria, conditions in your community that would make your community more competitive for the Grand Challenge experience. The first is that you already have efforts towards a coordinated community response in place, specifically YHDP round 1 and round 2, the 100-day challenge being a Spark community. So one question you might have on the phone already is, if I am a YHDP round 1 or round 2 community, can I participate? Yes, absolutely. And we will work to align your coaching and technical assistance in as much as possible with providers that may already be working with you well in your community. Another question that might come up that I want to just cover right now is, what if I am awaiting an application for YHDP round 3? And we're going to cover that question in the Q&A here in just a bit. Go to our website, awayhomeamerica.org, and look for the Grand Challenge tab. You will see that there are 3 documents currently posted to our website, and those are real basic formatted documents. We just wanted to get the information out to you. One is a Q&A that covers several of the questions that you might be asking yourself now. We will be adding to that document throughout the coming weeks, so check back frequently for updated versions of that Q&A responding to questions as we hear them. There's a guide for gaining your community support. It's a simple checklist of the steps that you might be considering over the coming several weeks before the application is posted. And there's also just an overview of the Grand Challenge and what this approach is. I want to turn now to question and answer, and I want to give a couple of reminders before we do that. So it's currently, we've got plenty of time for questions, and we want to hear from you. If you have joined via your computer audio, please raise your hand. You'll see that there's an option to do that if you hover over the option bar. Please raise your hand and we'll call on you and we can unmute you. If you are joined via your telephone audio, just enter your question in the chat box. We're not able to unmute you for reasons that are not terribly clear to me, but involve technology. But we do want to hear from you if you've joined by your computer. Just raise your hand and we'll call on you. I'm going to pass things to Jonathan. And Jonathan, I know we've got 2 questions that we want to start with. And I wonder if perhaps you'll pose those questions and then we'll start calling on folks from there.
All right. I think our first question is going to be from Nikki. So Nikki, if you could unmute yourself and ask the question, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Awesome. So, and Megan, I think you were just starting to raise this, but for those awesome communities that have done all that hard work to apply for the round 3 YHDP and are awaiting awards, do you have any guidance for those specific communities?
Absolutely. Thanks, Nikki. So we know that many of the frontrunner communities across the country may not have been awarded in round 1 or round 2, but are waiting on round 3 and may not know your community's, the status of that application by the time the Grand Challenge application posts. It is possible for Grand Challenge round 3 communities to participate in the Grand Challenge, but you need to be incredibly comfortable with your community's capacity to do both. So it is a capacity question. They are not counter to one another. In fact, as Jasmine shared, we see the Grand Challenge and community efforts as part of YHDP as really complementary. The Grand Challenge is a next step down this road, but again, need to have the capacity in your community to do so.
Thanks so much. Okay, let's go to our next question. Krista from True Colors. If you're there, can you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yep, thanks, Jonathan. Quick question about that we're getting from communities that we work with around fair housing. And folks are just wondering if it's illegal to prioritize LGBTQ youth or youth of color for housing, and what that means for the Grand Challenge.
Yeah, thank you, Krista. So that is a question that we have heard really frequently. So I'm glad that you posed it. The Grand Challenge, we're talking about ending homelessness for LGBT youth and youth of color. So does that mean that we just put those young people at the top of our housing placement list? And isn't it illegal to do that? I think you framed the question well. The answer is no. So the Grand Challenge is about targeted universalism. And what we're really talking about here is taking a look at every single change in our system, every aspect of our system, the way that we are working to end youth homelessness in our community, and really asking ourselves a central question, which is, does this work best for those young people most likely to experience homelessness? And how do we know? Does this align with the recommendations of our Youth Action Board, with young people who have experienced homelessness? And how do we radically transform our systems to work best for those young people most likely to experience it? There's a little more detail in the Q&A document on our website, but just reordering a placement list for housing wouldn't get us there. And it's not what the Grand Challenge intends. This is actually about a transformation of our system. Appreciate the question. And again, there's more on the Q&A document, but want to make that clear.
Okay, so moving on to our next question in the chat box, it looks like we have a question from Pauline. She's asking, if you do not have a YHDP grant, are you at a disadvantage in the application process for the Grand Challenge?
Thanks, Pauline. Great question. No, you are not. So if a community has, for whatever reason, not submitted a YHDP application that has not been the right decision for them at this time, that's absolutely fine. It's not a threshold criteria. So communities do not have to be a YHDP community to express interest. You would need to demonstrate that your community has that focus, have started to ask a question around how young people of color and LGBT youth are served in your current community system, a commitment to transformational equity, the capacity to do the work, team identified, and so on. But short answer is no.
Thank you. I'm going to pass this next question on to Jake. Jake, if you're there, the question is, are there privacy concerns in the by name list? Are there privacy concerns in the by name list?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something every community, it's really, really important when you're building a by name list that is quality, that you address security and privacy concerns. So we don't want anyone's data to be available to people other than and only the people to whom it is supposed to be available to help someone get a housing result. A lot of communities that have built quality by name lists already, often on other populations, have found ways to deal with this. So there is a big playbook of ideas to start with, things like using unique identifier numbers instead of names, so that when you're doing case conferencing, you're not always using names. Providing different levels of protection within your database, so some people can access certain kinds of information and other people can access other kinds. A lot of times it's important for people across the whole system to know that there is a person there, but only some of those people may need to know exactly who that person is or have access to that kind of information. So this is a problem that you and your community team will get to solve together. So you'll never build a by name list that doesn't meet your own standards for what you feel security would look like. And then we will also offer some minimum security thresholds that you should keep in mind. Absolutely.
Thanks so much, Jake. Appreciate that. So our next question that came up in the chat box from Casey. Thanks so much, Casey, for asking this question. It's a critical one. So it says, most of the LGBTQ youth in our community are generally staying in unstable couch hopping or couch surfing situations, and not necessarily in our shelter system or unsheltered system. But it seems that is how we're defining whether or not we achieve our goal. Can you provide more information as to why this goal is very focused on those that are sheltered and unsheltered? Megan, I think you're on mute.
Yep, sorry. Thank you, Casey. And Sarah, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well, but let me start with a response to this. And I think the short answer is this is absolutely the tension that Grand Challenge communities are going to grapple with and solve for. So I think one thing that we're looking at when we start by understanding who is experiencing homelessness in our community and need of support, we're looking to that active list and understanding, is this a meaningful look at those young people struggling with housing instability and homelessness in our community? Once we have that, then we are turning to, great, how do we address the needs of these young people? How do we meet them with what they're asking for? If your by name or active list is not capturing young people who are experiencing homelessness or not well capturing LGBT youth or youth of color, that's something that the community would need to solve for, and the Grand Challenge is a really terrific vehicle for doing that. I think one thing we might discover through this process is Away Home America is committed to aligning with the USICH criteria and benchmarks. I do want to flag that if young people are couch hopping and they are unsafe in their current location, they should be captured in a community's active list. They should be a young person who we are working with, but that ultimately a community needs to define who's the young people that we care about, that we're wrapping our arms around, who are the young people that we need to work with to get them to stable housing, and then solving for that. Sarah, do you have additional thoughts on that question? Again, I think that the big thing I want to say, Casey, is it's a terrific question, and it is the exact thing that communities will need to solve for as part of the Grand Challenge. But Sarah, any additional thoughts?
Nope, I'm with you.
Okay, fantastic. And that will definitely be an issue that comes up again. So thanks again, Casey, for that. Okay, we have another question coming in on the chat box from Eric. Eric starting by saying, not entirely sure if this is a question, but maybe something to bring up, and we'll respond to it. One critical ingredient that I hope the Grand Challenge can help to develop and refine is guidance for how public sector systems can use existing tools, resources, and authority to support a focus on these populations, assuming LGBTQ and people of color populations is what Eric is referring to, particularly giving questions that surface about whether how public systems can focus efforts on legally protected classes. We've had some success locally, but I'd be eager to hear what other approaches public systems are using. Thanks, Eric, and I'll let Megan or any of the other coaches, faculty respond to that.
I'm nodding in agreement, Eric, and I think, again, the Grand Challenge creates a container for communities to grapple with those questions about how systems come to the table in ways that actually effectively end youth homelessness for young people most likely to experience it, and we don't have those answers yet. So the Grand Challenge is really a container, a support team, and structure and additional support wrapped around a community to grapple and to work at those questions. So I'm just nodding vigorously. Any other coaches or faculty have comments?
I'll respond to it also, Megan. You know, I think of, when I think of the expertise of young people, and, you know, as a queer young person that has experienced homelessness more than once in my life, what I know is that oftentimes young people are figuring out ways to solve homelessness for themselves without the support of these systems. So I think the work here is how do we fill in that gap of knowledge between the expertise that young people hold for their own lives and the systemic knowledge that often overlooks the experiences, expertise, and knowledge of young people who are at the front lines of navigating systemic oppression. I'll let other coaches also add something if they would like.
Hey, Eric, it's Sarah. I also, having worked in a public system previously, not in one anymore, I think one of the things we often set up for ourselves are a lot of barriers as to why we can't do things. And what I'm hoping for from the Grand Challenge is that we're actually able to think long and hard about what those things are and why we have them in place and whether we need them there or not. And my hope is that what we get to bring to these questions, particularly around race, adultism, racism, adultism, heterosexism, cisgenderism, those particular questions, are there ways to answer those? Are there ways to approach it differently if all of these great minds are at the table?
Fantastic. All right. So let's move on. We have another, and folks can also raise their hands, and if they want to actually ask a question, that's encouraged also. We would love for you all to talk with us, but it's okay to also ask questions in the chat box, which we have several, so this is wonderful. All right. So we have a question from, I believe the name might be pronounced Rye, R-H-I-E, or Ree. Great name. The question is, how are systems in place to determine needs and placement for the by name list addressing the higher vulnerability rate among youth of color and queer youth? Apologies if I should know that already. I'm more direct service than data in my org. No need to apologize. Thank you for that question. And I'll open it up. Once again, how are systems in place to determine needs and placement for the by name list addressing the higher vulnerability rates among youth of color and queer youth?
I think that's a terrific question. And I hate to repeat myself, but I think that how we are prioritizing access to housing and how are we meeting the needs of all young people who are presenting as needing help is our challenge in ending youth homelessness, and is part of what the Grand Challenge is structured to address. There is a variety of ways communities are trying to solve for that problem. And Jake, I don't know if you have additional thoughts from veteran and chronic lens, but I would say briefly that it's a great question, and that is part of what we're working to address.
Yeah, I really agree. I would just add, I think we have seen communities in the Built for Zero work around veterans and chronic realize maybe that their assessment tool or their prioritization criteria were not achieving what they hoped they were able to achieve. And that is actually a place some of our communities have used that quality improvement, that improvement science methodology I talked about, to say, well, what if we tested doing it this way? Or what if we tested doing it that way? What kind of results would we see? And is that getting us where we want to go? And so I think there's room here to experiment. And I just want to say, I think sometimes we get really scared because the real, people's futures and what people get access to is at stake. We get really scared to experiment sometimes without certainty about what the result is going to be. And my hope is that the Grand Challenge becomes a place where we can say, hey, we're never going to figure out how to do it better unless we try some things. And let's do that in sort of a rigorous and boundaried environment where we can see the results really clearly together. So I guess that's my encouragement, is that hopefully this becomes a space where we can test new ideas for fixing the way that existing prioritization schemes maybe aren't working for us.
Mm-hmm. If I can add one thing to that, Jonathan, which is that you mentioned that young people, in particular young people, queer and trans young people and communities of color, are solving for their own experiences many times because there's not trust that the system can solve those, or there's evidence that the system cannot, right? So I think one of the things that inspires me most about the work of the Grand Challenge and this incredible team and the communities that will become part of this incredible team is that when we talk directly with young people about what works for them to address experiences of homelessness and housing instability, how could we then bring those strategies into the system so that the system functions better for everyone? It's turning to young people to ask them, what ideas do you have? What's worked in your life and in the lives of your community? And then can we test those ideas in the system in a rigorous way, as Jake suggests? What strategies will emerge when we start to listen to young people in a systemic way? I get really inspired and excited by that.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, moving on. Keep the questions rolling, everyone. This is a fantastic and fruitful conversation. I'm loving it. All right, so the next question in the chat box we have from Javon. He's asking a question saying, any suggestions for engaging youth in hostile communities against individuals experiencing homelessness, especially our youth? Also, any suggestions on bringing youth to the table and keeping them engaged when they're housing insecure?
You know, Jonathan, I saw that Aja raised their hand, and Aja, I'm wondering if you have any responses, particularly to the second question. You also may have had a comment, so I'd love to insert you here as well.
Sure.
Let me keep talking, Margaret. We'll work to unmute yours.
Yeah.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Okay, cool. I thought that.
Oh, you just cut out a little bit. Maybe hold your mic to you.
Hello?
That's it? Okay. Whatever you're doing there.
Okay, yep, this is what I'm gonna do. So yeah, so I raised my hand around the vulnerability, the questions around by name lists and vulnerability, like sort of like intake vulnerability assessments. I know that there's some work that's currently happening in King County around their vulnerability assessment tool and catching sort of in addressing racial biases, because we find that people of color are most likely to experience homelessness, but the people that are being served by, how do you explain it, the people that are being tested in as most vulnerable are not representative of the people that are actually like experiencing those things. And so there's an organization called Downtown Emergency, EESC, Downtown Emergency Services Center, that has taken upon themselves to partner with the University of Washington to create their own vulnerability assessment tool, which is a combination of what is required of them, of the tool that is attached to some funding, but also it has more of an interview sort of format, and basically the set of things that you're asking is the same, but there is room in the way that you deliver those questions and the language that's used in those. And also there's also more liberty in the way that answers are interpreted. And so you're able to kind of consult with other places that this person is receiving services, also consider different parts of their story and their body language to be able to to be able to kind of read between the lines of what a person is telling you by a simple yes or no. And so kind of learning to kind of think creatively and combine the tools that are required of you, but also with partnering with maybe different sectors and also the people who will be on the receiving end of the tool are really good steps to kind of begin to identify and address issues. And then kind of speaking about engaging if their housing is still unstable. That's a very good question. I think part of it is sort of figuring out what sort of, as you're taking on the Grand Challenge, first of all, being really intentional about the sort of high level spaces that you're, high level as in like vague categories of spaces that you are engaging youth in, and allowing those opportunities to be flexible and not so rigid in terms of, you can't miss this many days and things like that. And also probably like the use of proxies and the use of like alternatives is also a really good practice, I think, or a good way to address that. And it's also just a good way to spread opportunity and information around, and a really good perk of having like a youth advisory, like youth action board, as opposed to like a single like youth partner. So really being able to like build up a network of youth that are already existing, or whether that network is already existing, or as a sort of advisory function, or if it exists as a social support function that doesn't have, just being able to cater to that community and their needs and sort of, yeah.
Thank you, Audra. And I think one thing that's standing out to me in the questions is that, we have initial responses to some of the questions that communities are bringing up, and a tremendous amount of expertise on the team. And these are the types of questions that communities will grapple with as part of the Grand Challenge with additional support. So I appreciate what you brought up, Audra, and this is absolutely what the Grand Challenge is about. I think one thing that comes to mind for me in that question as well is if communities are not engaging with the services that are there, it might be less about, well, how do we engage young people, and more about, are we engaging them with the right things, and did they actually even ask for this? And I think the Grand Challenge helps turn that question to ask young people what is the engagement that they're looking for and needing.
Definitely, and a good space to like hold those conversations too, which is what's really exciting about it.
100%.
I had a couple of thoughts about the engaging youth when they are housing insecure.
Awesome, Caleb.
The work that we do with the National Youth Forum, this issue comes up all the time. And so part of it is, number one, diversifying the ways that you look at quote unquote engagement / collaboration. Sometimes I feel like we have kind of been very accustomed to having in-person meetings and that being like the main way to have a feedback loop. But there are also other ways that you can make the space available for young people to be able to provide some type of insight. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is that when dealing with folks who are still housing insecure, it's important that you are understanding and patient. There may be some times that they are not able to make it to meetings, and if their attendance is becoming a concern, of course, reaching out and seeing if they need any support, but also if they return, making them know that they were missed during that process. That is so monumental, and I think that we kind of we take it for granted often. But if we are gone away for a while, we come back, we want to know that people were thinking about us while we were away. So that's also another thing that I would offer. So the main thing is just diversifying the ways that you have engagement, or accepting feedback, or collecting feedback, and having a space to where they know that they can always come back, and that when they come back, that they are missed.
Fantastic. Yeah, I see snaps and claps all around the place. Thank you for that, for the last three folks that kind of spoke and responded to Javon. Much appreciated. So another question that came up, will the strategies for the Grand Challenge be different for rural areas versus urban areas, or will the strategies be universally applied?
Thank you, Jonathan. The two things that I want to mention about that question, the first is that the Grand Challenge will work with 10 communities to effectively end homelessness for LGBT youth and youth of color. And among those 10 communities, we'd like to ensure that communities across the country can see a community that represents them somewhere. So we know that responses to youth homelessness will look different in rural, urban, and suburban areas. So we'd like to have communities of different sizes participating in the Grand Challenge. What those differences look like is part of what the Grand Challenge will address and pursue, so the answers to those questions. So will they look different? I bet so. And we'll have communities that reflect different community sizes as part of the Grand Challenge.
Well, this has been a fruitful, fantastic conversation. Thank you for everyone who asked questions. We still do have time. If you have any last-minute questions, you can raise your hand or send them in now. And if not, we can move to our final thoughts. Megan?
Thanks, Jonathan. And I'd love to pass things to Sarah and then to Aja for some closing thoughts, and then I'll talk just for a moment about next steps. If you have any questions, if you're an introvert on the line and you just haven't asked your question yet, now will be the time to do that. But Sarah, I'll pass things to you for why you think the Grand Challenge is part of our way forward together.
Yeah, great. Sarah Hunter, CSH here. I'm super stoked about the Grand Challenge. I think mostly because we've done a lot of work around the country to sort of up our game in ending youth homelessness over the past several years. Certainly for decades, folks have been at it, right? And these are the first, I think, real conversations that I've been in where we've been really talking about the ways that that we're going to approach solutions based on the way that racism, sexism, heterosexism, cisgenderism, and adultism are playing out, both in our systems and interpersonally, personally, all of those things. And my hope is that we come to the table as a group of communities willing to seek solutions there, knowing it's going to be super tough, and that we have a lot of good sort of work that we already know how to build from. And that like taking all of these approaches together, I hope is going to be transformative for us. So I'm looking forward to this as sort of the starting place for a bunch of communities to be thinking about this work in really transformative ways. And I can't wait to see where we get as a country as a result of this work. So I'm just reiterating that I'm super stoked to be a part of it, and I can't wait to have communities on board really wrestling with this stuff too.
Megan, you're on mute.
Man, how many times have I done this, y'all? My apologies. Do we have any additional questions, or are we ready to move forward at this point?
I think we can move forward.
Great. Aja, I will, long pause. Confirming. Yep. Aja, I will pass things to you then for a couple of closing thoughts as well, and then I'm going to cover a few logistics. I also love that you were calling in from an architectural gem in Seattle, the Seattle Public Library, everybody. Do check it out. Go for it. Why do you feel like the Grand Challenge is part of our way forward?
Yeah, well, I think kind of echoing on a lot of sentiments today around sort of, there seems to be this brick wall when it comes to sort of the youth work and the youth collaboration work, where sort of words around like centering racial equity and like youth voice and youth choice just turn into like verbal exhale and less of like plans forward because of the lack of space to be able to try new things and to think creatively. And I think this like Grand Challenge is super exciting because it's sort of a safe space to sort of like decolonize our thinking around resolving youth and young adult homelessness, as well as the ways that I find it super exciting in terms of the youth collaboration and the youth leadership that it's going to take to be able to do this justice, because it inherently means that we have to, as allies of youth and of LGBTQ youth and of youth of color, we have to put them in a position, we have to put ourselves in a position, first of all, where we have to like earnestly listen to what they're saying and take it upon ourselves to believe in their truth and in their realities enough to muster all of our resources and all of our power to fulfill their needs that they have stated. And that's a massive, massive culture shift from the way that things have been done currently, and the things that have been done that have brought us to where we are. So it's going to take a massive, and it's a lot of work, right, to be able to do things so differently. And it's going to mean going against our muscle memory, which is often very painful because unlearning all habits are. But it's going to be I think it's going to be well worth it in the end, especially if we all do this together. And it's like it's exciting to do this, and I'm like really proud to be a part of it. And I think that this is going to be the way that we end youth and young adult homelessness.
Thank you, Aja. I really appreciate you being here. I'm going to close with a couple of logistics. So on our website, we are grateful that you all have joined us, and additional questions we hope will come to mind. Please send those questions directly to us and to me. My email is available on all the materials. And we'll make sure that all of the questions posed during today's webinar, as well as Monday's, update our Grand Challenge Q&A document that's available on the website. As I mentioned, there's also a guide for gaining your community support. So it's just a couple of simple steps that you might want to walk through with your community members between now and when the application posts at the end of July. There is a short turnaround for that application, but we want to really confirm that that is not going to be a laborious process for you or your community. We want to get the work started, not have you write a long application. Finally, I want to reflect on behalf of the Grand Challenge coaches and faculty and the leadership of Away Home America that has brought this work to here, that you are signing up as a Grand Challenge community to do a thing that nobody has done before. And there's an inherent amount of risk in that. We don't know what the road ahead will look like. We're learning as we go. We are going to make mistakes, and we want you to get in the ring with us and make those mistakes. As Aja said, we need to build a different type of muscle memory, and that will get us to a place where we have effectively ended homelessness among those young people most likely to experience it, and that will pave the road to end homelessness for everyone. So we're grateful to have you with us. We will close there. Please reach out directly if you would like any direct connection to your community to build support. We're happy to provide it. Thanks so much, everybody, and thanks to the panel and for Jonathan for being a part of it.